2 years ago, I created these renders for the OP-1 field. This time, I went back and reimagined the midnight version. Let me show you how I got here. Hey, welcome back, this is Leo in Color, and in this video I'll break down how I created the original version, plus the new changes I made to the updated OP-1 field model. Better topology and UVs, improved materials, and extra focus on lighting and rendering are some of the changes I did to elevate the original design I had. I started in Illustrator drafting the position of all the keys, knobs, screen, and the size of the body based on a reference image. Everything fits a perfect grid kind of, except for the sharp keys and the keyboard. Those are the ones with the black dots. Doing this helps me to get the alignment right from the beginning, so when modeling I don't have to think about the spacing between the keys. Then I moved those vectors into Maya and extruded them also based on a side reference image. I started modeling the main simplest key, which will be replicated all over the keyboard. And before duplicating, I made sure to get the UVs right. That will save me some time later on. Also, I'm using this starting button shape to create the alternative versions like the sharps and flat keys. It only takes a bit of editing the topology and the new ones are good to go. These keys will be replicated multiple times, the sharp keys 4 times and the flat ones 14 times. So in this case, it's better to create the UVs before duplicating these models. So they all have the same information, plus it saves you the repetitive manual work. All these reference cubes will be replaced eventually, but come in very handy for alignment. What you'll see me doing here is that I'm cutting them in half twice, so there's a vertex point in the center where I can snap the new duplicates. When modeling the knobs, I start with a primitive cylinder. What I want to make sure here is to add 2 cuts where the grip texture starts and where it ends. I'm not planning to model those little details into the high poly version, but instead to recreate them with a normal map. And having those cuts well positioned will help me place the texture in the right place later on. You can see me here as well, going back and forth between hard surface modeling and UV unwrapping models, and that's not usually my workflow or how I approach 3D modeling, but this time there are so many repeating pieces that it makes sense to take the time to create the UVs for every new shape before duplicating them. I learned everything I know about 3D through YouTube and endless searches online on how to translate my ideas into the computer. I did some courses here and there, from flip normals mostly, but again, most of the things I know how to do, I learned them for free on YouTube. That's why I'm creating these videos now, to show my process and maybe someone else gets the chance to learn from them. Now, if you find that this video helped, gave you some ideas, or you just found it interesting so far, I would appreciate if you can give it a like. That would really help me to expand the audience for this channel. And if you really want to commit, please consider subscribing for more videos like this one, breaking down modeling techniques, texturing, and rendering. Modeling the speaker grill took me more time than I would like to admit, mostly because I had to figure it out while doing it. My approach was to model one hole, get the edges right, and then start duplicating them into place, covering the entire grill. I combined all those shapes and then merged all the vertices by distance to make sure that there were no gaps or overlapping polygons. Then I aligned into the square, and with the same logic of combining and merging, I started cutting the squares so the edges match the ones from the holes. I was working on this piece for some time before realizing that I only need to focus on 1/4 of the shape, and then I can easily mirror it back into position. But hey, now I know it for the next time, and so do you. So no excuses. What I'm doing here is connecting some of the vertices to release some tension from the points closer to the holes. Now, if I'm being honest, I don't know if this makes any sense. It's a flat surface, so n-gons won't be pinching or creating any issues with the textures, but I took the time to do it anyway. Up to this point, both the old and new OP-1 field models were the same, but from here I started refining the original design. I began with the right side of the keyboard. The original Teenage Engineering design had a single clean edge with no extra elevations on the plug section, just a material change from metal to plastic. In my first model, this section wasn't an accurate representation of the real design. To fix this, I rebuilt the entire section, recreating all the ports and the on and off switch. The topology is now more localized, and I avoided continuous edge loops running across the entire area. Next, I added a grill to the left side of the board, using the same technique as the speaker grill. I modeled a single hole, duplicated and combined them into one piece, then cut the same pattern into the body, and after that I merged and bridged all the edges for a clean result. Finally, I refined the edges of the metal body. Looking closer at reference images, I realized that the edge actually has a bevel, not a round corner like in the first model. I cleaned that up, making it not only more accurate but also sharper and more defined. This bevel could also be something I can highlight later with the lighting. Moving on to materials and UVs, I completely reworked the process. I wasn't convinced by the shiny metal in the first render, so this felt like the perfect time to introduce a dark mode to this sampler. In the previous model, I used 3 materials, one for the body, one for the buttons, and one for the screen. But this time I took a different approach. Instead of separate materials, everything except the screen shared the same one, using a UDIM workflow with UVs unwrapped across multiple tiles. For this version, I used 4 4K maps for the body and a separate material with another 4K map for the screen. Because at this point I didn't know if I wanted to animate the screen or not, I kept it in a separate material, giving me more flexibility to decide later on. Using 5 4K maps for such a simple prop might seem a bit excessive, but since this is a personal project, there are no rendering restrictions. Plus, the extra resolution will make close-up shots look even better. For the texturing process, I knew I wanted to move away from the original bright look and go for a dark mode version. At first, I experimented with an all-black design, making both the keys and the bodies of the sampler completely dark. But after some test renders, I realized it was a bit hard to read. The contrast just wasn't working. So I started looking for references, and it didn't take long to land on the midnight finish of the new MacBook Pros. I always liked the black keys and silver body of Mac keyboards, but I wonder what if instead of silver, which is a bit too bright, I added a slight tint of blue. I went through a few iterations, tweaking the balance between darkness and saturation. Some versions felt too dark, losing detail, while others were too bright and lost that moody feel. And eventually I found this dark gray with just a hint of blue, and I think it's the right balance. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. In my opinion, it keeps the design readable while still feeling modern. Then came the keys. The original design had white keys with dark dots, so I decided to invert that, using the same material but adjusting the color to match the body. This kept the visual language consistent while still making the text and symbols easy to read. I also experimented with subsurface scattering on the keys, hoping to give them a softer, more rubber-like feel instead of looking like hard plastic. But after some back and forth, I realized it didn't add much to the overall design, so in the end I scrapped that idea and kept things simpler. For the lighting setup in this scene, I went with a classic 3-point light setup. I started with an HDRI and a dome light, using them as the main fill light. I positioned this fill coming from the right, creating a soft base illumination that set the overall tone of the scene. Next, I placed the key light roughly at a 45-degree angle, pointing down into the keyboard from the left back side. This was the primary source of contrast, shaping the form of the sampler and highlighting the top left corner where the screen is as the main point of interest. But I noticed the front side of the frame was getting a bit lost in the shadows, blending too much with dark background. To fix that, I added another fill light, and I angled it to create a subtle gradient, shifting in intensity from right to left. This helped separate the sampler from the background while keeping the lights interesting. Finally, I introduced a third fill light, but I restricted the projection only to the knobs. The key light was casting deep shadows on the visible side of the knobs, and since there wasn't much natural bounce, they were getting a bit lost. Alright, if you made it all the way to the end, first of all, thank you for watching. Now, here are the final renders of the OP-1 field Midnight. If you found this video interesting or inspiring, a like would really be appreciated. It helps more people discover the channel. And if you're feeling bold and want to see more breakdowns like this, consider subscribing to the channel. Also, if you'd like to get your hands on this model, check the link in the description to purchase a copy. Let me know what you think of the final renders in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.